They thought he was just another Hollywood star. A man who wouldn't fight back. A man who would walk away. But when a ruthless biker hurt what he loved most, he didn't run. He didn't beg. He didn't forgive. This is the story of a legend. Of justice served in blood and shadows. And when the dust settles, no one will ever forget the night Keanu Reeves made them pay. Stay till the end to witness how one man turned the hunters into the hunted. The desert air was crisp, carrying the distant scent of gasoline and dust. Keanu Reeves walked down the dimly lit streets of a quiet Arizona town. His loyal dog, Baxter, trotting beside him. The German shepherd was old but strong, his tail wagging lazily as they passed the flickering neon sign of a rundown bar, Iron Fangs. Laughter spilled out onto the street, the deep, guttural kind that meant trouble. Keanu barely glanced their way. He wasn't here to make enemies. He just wanted peace. But peace was fragile, and it shattered the moment a heavy boot connected with Baxter's ribs. A yelp of pain. A thud as the dog hit the pavement. Keanu froze. The laughter got louder. A man, tall and broad with a shaved head and cruel eyes, grinned down at him. Roy Mad Dog Graves, leader of the Iron Fangs. What the hell is your problem? Keanu's voice was steady, but his hands clenched into fists. Roy smirked. Just having a little fun. Ain't that right, boys? The other bikers chuckled. Someone took a drag from a cigarette. Baxter struggled to his feet, whimpering. Keanu kneeled beside his dog, checking for injuries. His heart pounded, but his face remained unreadable. He had spent years mastering control. Roy leaned closer, his breath reeking of whiskey. You don't belong here, Hollywood. Take your mutt and walk away. Keanu exhaled slowly. His fingers grazed Baxter's fur. The dog trembled. He stood up, took one last look at Roy, and walked away, for now. Keanu carried Baxter home, his hands trembling with barely contained fury. The old dog whimpered softly, curling against his chest as if sensing his owner's unrest. Every step back to his small house in the desert felt heavier than the last. He placed Baxter on the couch, gently checking his ribs. Nothing broken, just bruises. But the pain in the dog's eyes was enough to send fire through Keanu's veins. He poured himself a drink, but the whiskey tasted like ash. His reflection in the window stared back at him, expressionless, but his mind was screaming. Let it go! A voice inside him whispered. You walked away. It's over. But it wasn't over. He could still hear Roy's laughter, still see the smug, twisted pleasure in his eyes. Keanu Reeves had spent decades training for fights that weren't real. But this was real. And something deep inside him, something long buried, told him that this was a fight he couldn't walk away from. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I hope your mutt makes it through the night. Maybe next time he won't be so lucky. Winking face, Keanu's grip tightened around the phone. The glass in his other hand shattered. That was the moment he decided. He wouldn't wait for next time. He was going to make them regret ever crossing him. The Iron Fangs owned the night. Their bar, their town, their rules. No one challenged them. Until now. Keanu stood outside Iron Fangs, his face hidden beneath the hood of his jacket. Inside, the bikers drank, laughed, completely unaware that their world was about to change. He walked in. The smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke clung to the air. Music blasted from a jukebox. Roy Graves sat in the corner, surrounded by his men, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in front of him. Keanu didn't go for him. Not yet. Instead, he walked up to the bar and set down $100 bill. Whiskey. Neat. The bartender hesitated. The whole place was staring now. A biker stepped up beside him. A stocky guy with tattoos creeping up his neck. You got a lot of nerve showing your face here, movie star. Keanu didn't respond. He took a slow sip of his drink. The biker sneered. Maybe you didn't hear me. He grabbed Keanu's shoulder. Wrong move. Keanu twisted, his elbow slamming into the man's throat. A choked gasp. Then a glass shattering as the biker crashed into a table. Silence. Then chaos. The next one swung at him. Keanu ducked, drove a fist into his ribs, then spun and smashed his head against the bar. Blood splattered across the counter. Another came at him with a knife. Keanu caught his wrist, twisted, and sent the blade flying. A knee to the stomach. A final blow to the jaw. Bodies hit the floor. Groans of pain filled the room. Roy watched, unimpressed. He took a slow sip of whiskey. "You done?" Keanu exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "Not even close." Roy smirked. "Then let's have some real fun." The doors slammed shut. More bikers stood up. 12 against 1. Keanu flexed his fingers, feeling the bruises already forming. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Keanu barely made it out of Iron Fangs in one piece. The fight had been brutal. He took down 6 of them before the numbers caught up to him. Boots and fists rained down. He hit the floor hard, tasting blood. Someone laughed. Then came the sharp crack of a rifle being cocked. "Enough!" Roy's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The beating stopped. Keanu groaned, spitting crimson onto the floor. His vision blurred, but he could make out Roy crouching beside him. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Roy whispered, his breath hot with whiskey. "This ain't a movie, Reeves. You don't get to ride off into the sunset." He grabbed Keanu's jacket and yanked him close. "Go home. Forget this ever happened. Because next time, you won't be walking out of here." Then came the final blow, a boot to the ribs. Darkness swallowed everything. Keanu woke up hours later in a ditch outside town. The pain was dull now, a constant hum beneath his skin. He wiped blood from his face and pulled himself up. His ribs screamed, but he ignored them. He had 2 choices, walk away or strike back. There was no choice. By sunrise, he had a plan. He spent the day gathering information, asking around, listening, watching. The Iron Fangs weren't just a gang. They were a family, bound by blood, crime, and fear. Roy ruled over them like a king. But even kings could bleed. One by one, Keanu started hunting them. That night, the first one fell. A biker named Travis, the one who'd held him down during the beating. Keanu found him alone behind a gas station, smoking. He didn't even see the punch coming. A few well-placed strikes, and Travis was on the ground, groaning. "Tell Roy I'm coming." Keanu left him there, bleeding in the dirt. By the time the next man disappeared, the Iron Fangs knew. This wasn't over. This was war. Roy Graves was not a man used to being challenged. The Iron Fangs were a brotherhood, bound by loyalty and violence. They ruled the desert with an iron fist, and nothing, not even the law, could stand against them. But now, someone was hunting them, taking down their men one by one. At first, Roy thought it was just a fluke, some lone vigilante with a vendetta. But then, when the third body turned up, bloodied and beaten beyond recognition, it became clear. This was personal. Keanu had made a mistake. Roy sat in the back of the bar, his fists clenched around his whiskey glass, his gaze cold as he watched his men scramble. They were scared. For the first time in years, the mighty Iron Fangs were shaking in their boots. "Who the hell does he think he is?" Roy muttered to himself, barely audible over the hum of conversation. "This is our town." He should have stayed the hell away. But Keanu hadn't. For days, Keanu had been methodically eliminating them. Each one caught alone. Each one a message. Roy had no idea how Keanu was tracking them so precisely. But it didn't matter. What mattered was the growing fear, the knowledge that this man, this Hollywood actor, was capable of making them bleed. Roy decided it was time to send a message of his own. Keanu sat alone in his modest home, the harsh desert winds rattling against the windows. He had expected retaliation. What he didn't expect was what came next. The knock on the door was soft, almost apologetic. He knew immediately it wasn't a friend. He stood up slowly, his body still aching from the previous battles. There was no time to rest, no time for weakness. The door swung open to reveal a man, a courier. He was tall, dressed in black, and his eyes were shaded by dark glasses. He held out an envelope, the seal on the front unmistakable. It was the Iron Fang's mark. Keanu took the envelope, his heart beating faster. His instincts told him this was a warning. He opened it without hesitation. The message was simple, written in bold, threatening letters. "We have Baxter. You have until dawn." Keanu's blood ran cold. For a moment he was frozen. The thought of his dog, his loyal companion, at the mercy of those savages was enough to send a wave of fury through him. But he forced himself to stay calm. This was it, the final confrontation. He had no intention of playing by their rules. They wanted him to come to them? Fine. But he wasn't going to walk into their trap blindly. Keanu made his way to the outskirts of town, the moonlight casting long shadows across the barren landscape. The Iron Fangs had taken Baxter to an old warehouse, one that had been abandoned for years, a perfect place for a showdown. As he approached the building, he could see movement inside, figures standing in the dark, waiting. He knew this would be a fight to the death. Keanu moved quickly, slipping into the shadows. He had spent years training for moments like this. His movements were silent, fluid, as he circled the building. He wasn't here to negotiate. He was here for blood. Inside, Roy and his men stood in a circle around Baxter, who was chained to a pillar, trembling but still alive. Roy looked up, meeting Keanu's gaze through the cracked window. His smile was cold. "You finally decided to show up," Roy said, his voice carrying through the warehouse. "You should have stayed away. Now you'll pay the price." Keanu didn't respond. He didn't need to. With a swift motion, he broke through the window, shattering the glass with a loud crash. Before any of the bikers could react, he was inside, his fists flying. The first man fell instantly, a punch to the throat, silent and deadly. The others barely had time to react. Keanu was a blur of movement, his training kicking in. He ducked and weaved, landing strikes with precision, each one taking down another biker. Roy watched from the corner, his smile slowly fading as he realized this wasn't the same man he had laughed at earlier. This wasn't just some Hollywood actor. This was a man who had been pushed too far. A man who was willing to burn everything to get his revenge. Keanu reached Baxter, unchaining him in one fluid motion. The dog whined softly but licked his hand, a sign that he was still alive, still with him. But Roy wasn't done. He lunged at Keanu, his knife gleaming in the dim light. Keanu turned just in time, grabbing Roy's wrist and twisting it until the blade fell to the ground. With a swift kick, he sent Roy crashing to the floor. Roy struggled to get up, his eyes filled with fury. "You're gonna regret this." Keanu stepped forward, looking down at him with cold, unblinking eyes. "I already have." The warehouse was silent, save for the heavy breathing of Roy and the distant hum of the desert wind outside. The Iron Fangs were down, their bodies scattered across the floor, some still twitching, others already motionless. Keanu stood over Roy, his breath steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. His heart pounded, but his mind was calm. He had been in this position before, facing men who underestimated him, who thought they could break him. Roy looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of hatred and disbelief. "You think you've won, Hollywood? You don't know what you're messing with." His voice was hoarse, the anger still there, but it was laced with desperation now. Keanu crouched down, his face inches from Roy's. "I know exactly what I'm messing with." He reached for the knife that had fallen from Roy's hand and held it up. "You see, the thing about making threats is that eventually, someone stops listening." Roy's eyes flickered with something close to fear. He tried to push himself up, but his body was too broken. His hands shook, his face pale. "Please," Roy gasped, his voice trembling. "You don't understand. We were just trying to survive. You think I wanted to hurt your dog? It was just business. I didn't think." Keanu slammed the knife into the concrete floor between them, the sharp edge digging into the ground with a satisfying thud. "Enough," he said, his voice cold and unwavering. "You didn't think, but you made a choice, and now you have to live with the consequences." Roy's gaze fell to the floor, the weight of his choices crashing down on him. He had underestimated Keanu just like everyone else had. He had thought he could intimidate him, break him, make him bend. But Keanu was not a man who bent. He was a man who broke others. Keanu stood, looking down at the shattered man at his feet. The anger, the blood, the pain. It all seemed so distant now. He had come for revenge, but now, all he felt was emptiness. "It's over," Keanu said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "You're done." With that, Keanu turned and walked toward Baxter, who was now standing at the edge of the room, his tail wagging weakly. Keanu knelt down and petted him gently, the soft sound of his breath calming Keanu's mind. But as he turned to leave, he felt a shadow fall across him. Roy, despite his injuries, was trying to stand. His hand reached for a gun on the ground. Keanu knew what was coming, but he didn't hesitate. He didn't even flinch. Before Roy could get the gun in his grip, Keanu was there. A single step forward, a swift movement, and the gun was out of his hand, lying useless on the floor. Roy's eyes widened in realization. No! The final shot was silent, a single motion that ended the man's life. Keanu didn't watch the last breath leave Roy's body. He didn't need to. The Iron Fangs were no more. Roy Graves was dead, and the desert was quiet once again. Keanu walked out of the warehouse, Baxter by his side. The night sky stretched wide above them, the stars flickering like distant memories. He didn't know what the future held, or if he'd ever be free of the ghosts of this war. But one thing was certain: he had won. As they disappeared into the dark horizon, Keanu didn't look back. The sun was beginning to rise over the desert, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple. The quiet was almost unnatural, the silence stretching over the land like a heavy blanket. Keanu and Baxter walked through the empty streets of the town, the faint hum of the wind the only sound accompanying their steps. The world had changed in just one night. Keanu felt the weight of it, more than the bruises that still ached, more than the blood that stained his clothes. The storm had passed, but its aftermath was something he couldn't ignore. He had taken lives. He had fought a war that wasn't his to fight. And now, as the dust settled, he was left to pick up the pieces of a life that had been shattered long before the first punch was thrown. Keanu stopped at the edge of the town, looking back at the smoldering ruins of what was once a place he'd never wanted to be. The town would rebuild. It always did. But it would never be the same. Not after what had happened here. He didn't know what had driven him to act, to walk into that bar and challenge Roy Graves, to hunt down every last member of the Iron Fangs. Maybe it was revenge. Maybe it was justice. Maybe it was the years of pent-up anger and loss, waiting for an excuse to burn everything down. He wasn't sure anymore. But as he stood there, Baxter by his side, Keanu realized that the fight hadn't just been about him or the Iron Fangs. It had been about something deeper. It had been about redemption. Later that evening, Keanu stood outside his small home, staring at the vast, empty desert that stretched before him. The sun had set, leaving the sky bathed in deep reds and purples. He had no plans to stay here forever. The desert, like everything else, had a way of swallowing people whole. But for now, he needed this. The solitude, the silence. Baxter lay at his feet, content, his breathing slow and steady. He was healing, slowly but surely. Keanu knew the dog would be fine. It was the man who wasn't so sure. "You saved me, boy," Keanu whispered, his hand resting on Baxter's head. "But I don't know if I can save myself." The stars twinkled above them, distant and indifferent to the events that had unfolded below. Keanu didn't have the answers. He didn't know what came next. But for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. The town would heal. The memory of the Iron Fangs would fade with time. But Keanu knew that some scars would never disappear. And that was the price of victory. Weeks passed since the final fight. Keanu had stayed away from the small town, leaving behind the memories of blood and chaos. Life, as it always did, moved on. The world didn't care about the battles he fought or the ghosts that haunted him. There were always new battles, new stories to tell, new people to hurt or be hurt by. But for Keanu, it was different. There were nights when he would wake up, his body still trembling from the fight, his mind replaying the moments over and over. The crunch of bones under his fists, the sickening sound of a blade slicing through flesh, Roy's dying breath. But it wasn't just the fight that haunted him. Keanu had spent years running from his own past, burying the pain of loss and regret beneath a mask of fame and success. He had lived for the thrill, the escape, the lights of Hollywood. But when Roy Graves and the Iron Fangs came into his life, it was like everything. The anger, the guilt, the scars came rushing back. As he sat in his modest home, watching the wind sweep dust across the empty desert, Keanu felt the weight of his choices. He had sought revenge. He had sought justice. But in the end, all he had done was confirm the darkness inside of him. The past was always there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when the pain would be too much to ignore. Baxter was his anchor. The dog had been through hell, and yet he remained by Keanu's side. Every day, the bond between them grew stronger. But Keanu knew it wasn't enough. The guilt of what he had done, of what he had become, was a shadow that couldn't be outrun. One evening, as Keanu was walking Baxter along the desert road, something caught his eye. A familiar figure was standing in the distance, silhouetted against the fading light of the sun. Keanu's heart skipped a beat. He recognized the man instantly. It was someone from his past, a former ally, a friend. He hadn't seen him in years. And now, there he was, standing in front of him as if time had never passed. "Keanu?" the man called out, his voice calm but heavy with unspoken words. Keanu stopped, unsure of what to say. His throat felt tight. "What are you doing here?" The man stepped closer, his eyes searching Keanu's face. "I heard what happened. I heard about the Iron Fangs." He paused, looking at the dog at Keanu's side. "I heard about Baxter." Keanu said nothing. The man shook his head. "You've been running for a long time, Keanu. Running from yourself. But you can't outrun who you are." The words hit Keanu harder than he expected. He had spent so many years trying to outrun his past, trying to bury it beneath layers of fame, wealth, and adrenaline. But now it was all coming back. "I thought I was done," Keanu said quietly. "I thought this town was the end of it. I thought I could be at peace." The man smiled softly, but there was sadness in his eyes. "You can't find peace by running, Keanu. Peace isn't something you can chase. It's something you have to make." For a long moment, Keanu said nothing. The wind rustled the dry grass around them, and for the first time in years, Keanu felt the weight of his past, and the possibility of redemption, pressing down on him. The man stepped back, his eyes never leaving Keanu. "It's up to you now. Whether you want to continue fighting or whether you want to finally stop running." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Keanu standing in the desert, alone with his thoughts. As Keanu watched him disappear into the horizon, something inside him shifted. For the first time, he felt the urge to face what he had done, to confront the darkness, not with fists or fury, but with the quiet strength that had been buried beneath the surface for so long. It wasn't over. It would never be over. But maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for peace, for redemption. The following days were the hardest Keanu had faced in a long time. Every moment felt like an echo of the past, a reminder of everything he had done and everything he had lost. The desert stretched out before him, vast and empty, just like the feeling that had settled deep inside him. He wasn't sure what had changed in him, whether it was the conversation with his old friend or the simple fact that he had reached the end of his rope. But as he sat in his quiet home, watching Baxter sleep beside him, something stirred inside of him. The guilt was still there. The darkness still lingered. But Keanu felt a pull to do something more than simply live in the shadow of his past. He had spent so much of his life running, but now, the idea of running no longer seemed like an option. The ghost of Roy Graves haunted him. The death, the violence, it had all been necessary, but it had come with a cost. He had saved Baxter, and he had avenged the wrongs done to him, but at what price? He had killed. He had become the very thing he had once despised. He stood up, moving toward the window, his eyes scanning the horizon. The desert was still, quiet, Maybe this is it, he thought. Maybe this is all there is. This is what I have now. Just me and Baxter. And the peace I have to make for myself. Keanu's life had been one of extremes. The bright lights of Hollywood. The constant rush of adrenaline. The battles fought both on screen and in his own heart. But now all he wanted was to step away from the chaos. To disappear. To find something that was his own. Without the weight of the past constantly pulling at him. It was then that he realized redemption wasn't something that would be given to him. It wasn't something that would come in a single grand moment. It was something he had to choose every day. Weeks turned into months, and life, in its strange way, began to return to normal. The small town began rebuilding, the remnants of the Iron Fangs fading into the past, becoming just another story whispered on the wind. Keanu didn't go back. He didn't need to. The town wasn't his home anymore, and it never had been. Baxter remained by his side, the only constant in his life. The dog had healed from the scars left by the Iron Fangs, just as Keanu had healed from the emotional wounds he carried. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Keanu didn't need to chase redemption. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. He had done what he had set out to do. And in the end, it wasn't about the fight or the victory. It was about learning to live with himself. As the sun set on the horizon, Keanu walked with Baxter into the desert, their footprints disappearing into the sand. There was no grand ending, no resolution, just the quiet of the night, the stars above, and the promise that, for the first time in a long time, Keanu had found some measure of peace. If the story resonated with you, made you think, or even gave you chills, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It's not just about the story. It's about joining this journey together. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. What do you think Keanu's true redemption looks like? Let's talk about it. If you're ready for more stories that dig deep into the human spirit, subscribe, and you won't miss a thing. Until next time, keep searching for your own peace.